So now, let's talk a little bit more about the letters themselves. The original letters are not in English.
No, they're in German, and the written word that he uses is called Suderlein Deutsch, Suderlein German. The letters are different from our writing today, so not a normal person cannot read it.
Okay, so somebody has to know how to read that then to translate it, which you know how to read.
Yeah.
So
I learned from my grandmother, and I translated it first into modern German, and then into English. This way I didn't have to stop and start, you know.
Okay. And how many letters are in the book?
Ooh,
roughly.
No, I never counted them.
Never counted them?
No, but more than 10, I believe.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, though, how long about did it take you to translate all these letters into English?
About 3 winters.
3 winters?
Because in the summer I garden.
Summer you garden, winter you translate.
Yeah. Or I write in general in winter.
So a labor of love, I would assume.
It was, yeah. As a matter of fact, when I first started and these animal stories, because I'm an animal lover, I fell in love with him. I really did. I was so sorry I didn't live. Then, once he moved to Pennsylvania and left his wife to go with the opera company in a little house that he found near Port Jervis, and he told her, well, you have to keep the horse in the kitchen this winter because we don't have a stable yet. I instantly fell out of love. That's where it ends.
That's where it ends there? No horses in the house?
No. No.
Before the letters, were you aware of Louis Hensel?
Well, I was aware that the photography was sold under his name.
And that's interesting because it's his son's photography, really?
It's his son's photography, really.
Whose first name was?
Ludolf. But Louis, you know, it's the same thing. They're sold under his name, Louis. I have no problem with that.
So people confuse the two, though?
Today, well, nobody was aware of Ludolf being the photographer until I started translating.
So they all thought Louis, the father, was the photographer, when in reality it was the son.
The plates were found in the same area where the letters were found, or some of the letters as far as I know. And because the letters were signed Louis Hensel, the photography was assigned to Louis Hensel.
Okay, and now when you say where the letters were found, where were the letters found?
In an old house in Hawley. On
in
Main
an old
Street.
house in
Hawley?
Hawley?
That somebody bought and found them and the photography.
Really?
Yeah.
And so how did you get involved? How did you become aware of these letters?
They were given to me because
somebody knew that you might be able to translate these letters and they approached you?
Yeah. A person that I knew that I was interested in history and have a background with Germany, and they asked, you want to translate? Just make sure that the copies go to the library. And that's how I got involved, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And because of the writing, not just is the writing different, but his pronunciation, not being English or American, he wrote things down the way he heard them. It took me almost a month to figure out what Jackson was. S-C-H-A-K-S-E-N or O-N. It was Jackson City.
Oh.
And I couldn't figure it out for the life of me until I finally got out a map. And I tried to follow the way the opera company traveled, and I figured out, well, it can only be Jackson.
Okay, so he
some names I actually couldn't translate.
He kind of wrote the way he pronounced things.
The way he heard and pronounced.
Yeah, okay.
But he was fluent in French. He was fluent in English and German. Really well educated, even if some of it was self-educated. And one of his best friends was the pastor in Hawley, Pastor Gottlieb. They both were interested in science and history, and they sat and talked and shared books.
That's a name that you often see come up in Hawley history, that pastor's name.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In other things, I've seen that name come up.
It was the era when the German population, was becoming more Americanized and wanted their schools taught in English, and they wanted their church sermons spoken in English. Up till then, it was only German. And Pastor Gottlieb was not proficient in English to preach, apparently. And they got rid of him and got somebody else in, and it upset Hensel to no end. He lost his best friend. But
considering, just from reading the letters, it's so obvious of his work ethic. What do you think Louis Hensel would think of the work ethic in this country today?
I mean, we still have hardworking people and people who will change and try to find everything. But the safety net is great the way we have it, but we should not make it over comfortable for people. You have to leave an incentive to go out and find a job that pays you more. And I think that would be a little bit disappointing to him, because he insisted on working and on whatever you do it the best way you can, do it with honor was his way of saying it.
Do it with honor,
yeah.
Regardless of whatever that job is.
Exactly.
Do it with honor.
And there's a whole letter where he describes another German immigrant who came into Long Island, a young man who was educated, tried to work on a farm, wasn't really able to, so he found him a job in a mill. And after years, the miller gave him the mill. And of course he paid some of it for it. The young man sold the mill when a water company wanted the creek that was running by there to supply water into the area, and went into the Milwaukee and the backcountry there, became a farmer, bought a big farm, lost everything. Because if you didn't pay your mortgage, the next day you were out.
Right.
And he had to leave the farm with a wife and child, no shoes. He handmade shoes for his family, went into the major city, I think it was Milwaukee at the time, became a street cleaner in a gang for $1 a day. The supervisor found out that he was educated, with numbers and writing, and asked him, would you keep the books for me? From there, word got around, he became a teacher in the area, and the other teachers were so impressed with him, they made him a supervising teacher, where he had a big house. He met Louis again when Louis came there with the opera company. They bound up, and Louis describes the whole life of this young man. From nothing, I mean, from something to nothing and to something again.
Now, you mentioned when he left New York City and came to the Port Jervis area, actually on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware, that was his first house in this area. What happened with the bridge in Port Jervis? There's a great story in here about the bridge in Port Jervis. What happened?
He describes the collapse of one of the first bridges across the Delaware, and how his son almost got killed because he was crossing it that day and then had to stay on the other side for days before a ferry could get him back. And he describes beautifully the building of the next little bridge, which was too low, with no railings and too wobbly, and how that one was taken down eventually. But also, after the bridge collapsed, how much problems it caused for farmers to bring produce into Port Jervis, how expensive it was in those days, you know. So his description of the area, even Glen Falls he describes beautifully, and Forest City, oh my God, he traveled to Forest City.
Forest City,
yes,
really?
And he spent, for the area beautiful, he spent New Year's of 1900 in Honesdale.
Really?
Describes how the river was frozen, everybody walked across the river. Just his local descriptions are wonderful. Very adventurous man.
Fantastic.
The gravity line, he describes the gravity line in detail. He took it from Honesdale to Forest City, to Carbondale, and then another little trip to Forest City.
Now, why do you call him the horse whisperer?
Because, I mean, 150 years ago.
I mean, we have a horse whisperer today.
Now,
He's very famous.
But I mean, for the era, 150 years ago, he took a stallion that was killing people and spent days feeding it sugar cookies, talking to it, and making it to himself like a dog. They became almost one. He loved his horse Peter, and there are letters full of stories of his horse Peter that he just, you can feel the love that comes through, the way he loved animals. His first animal in Long Island was, he couldn't afford a horse. He got an ox from a family that lived there, and he trained that ox to run on command.
I think you'd have a hard time even finding an ox in Long Island today.
Yeah, but he had actually a race with somebody in a coach who was making fun of him and his ox and the cart. So he turned over and he said, "You want to race, you know?" And the guy said, "Sure." And he gave his command, and he said his ox put the tail straight up and started racing down the road. And the guy was a coach, his horses bolted, and he wound up in a ditch. A lot of good stories in there.
A lot of great stories in this book. Sigrid, we've learned a lot about Louis Hensel, but we know very little about Sigrid. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Sigrid, I'm going to get it right, see? So
I take what I can get. Sigrid, cigarette, secret.
Tell us about yourself.
I was born in Germany toward the end of the war. Just turned 70 last week.
God bless you.
And I escaped from East Germany with my family in '52 when the East German government was taking over private businesses. My father had a business. And I left Germany in '62, came to the United States, just like Louis, I'm an immigrant, and had many jobs. I started out, actually I was trained as an artist, painting. My grandmother was a great artist. And I've done real estate, I've flown as a stewardess around the world a few times.
Really?
As Pan American.
Pan American?
Yeah, in the '60s was a lot of fun. We still got layovers. But I started writing about 20 years ago, and I actually published a children's book 3 years ago. But I couldn't advertise it, I couldn't promote it, because at the time I had brain surgery.
You're starting to sound like this guy, you know that?
Exactly.
Okay.
I feel very much like him. Yeah, and then when the letters came my way, I couldn't say no. That's just too much fun.
So these days you're a writer?
Yes.
You're an artist?
Yes, I do animal portraits, and I don't charge anything, but I ask people to donate to the local animal shelters.
And do you have a website or a way
Yeah, it's Pet Portraits by Sigrid, but it's just the portraits. It's nothing about the book.
Okay.
The book is at Amazon.com, and the Hawley Library will get most of the proceeds once I recoup.
Fantastic. Well, Sigrid, did I get it right?
I'd take whatever you have.
No, I'm going to get it right. I'm going to get it right.
In German, it's Sigrid.
I really enjoyed this show today.
Good.
I learned a lot, and I plan to learn a lot more.
It's fascinating.
From finishing this book.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to come by the show again and tell us some more stories, all right? Next time, on your next adventure. I'm sure I'm sure just like this guy, you have another adventure in you yet.
Yes, I do.
To come.
Yeah, I'm writing right now.
See,
a novel.
All right, well, there you go. You're going to have to come back and tell us about the novel.
Okay.
And you're going to have to come back, too, next week, same time, same station, for more of Northeast Current. Until then, for Sigrid, bye-bye until next week. See you, everybody.
Perfect.